The trial of the former flight instructor who had lost his certificate and then was involved in a fatal accident while still instructing is pushed back to October. Plus, new charges and a new defendant have been named in that indictment. Let's find out who that is on this episode of Taking Off. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken, and last August 6th, we reported on a former certified flight instructor, a CFI, who had been charged with manslaughter following a fatal crash involving a student. Now, the trial has been postponed to October. However, the legal battle has expanded with new charges and putting the flight school where the fake CFI worked under scrutiny. And let's quickly recap. First, the instructor. Philip McPherson II learned to fly and went through his certifications, finally getting his flight instructor certification. There are reports that he did multiple testing failures along the way. And the picture we have of McPherson has been confirmed by a former student. There were no other pictures that we could find of McPherson. And then he lost his pilot certificate, which we'll get into in a moment. Then he continued to instruct without a pilot certificate. And then one day, he crashed with a student, and that student died. He survived, and here are the details. In September of 2022, the tragic plane crash occurred shortly after takeoff from Queen City Airport in Allentown, Pennsylvania. It claimed the life of 49-year-old student pilot Keith Kozel. The aircraft, a Piper PA-28140, a Cherokee, was flown by McPherson, who was not legally authorized to fly at that time. This devastating incident exposed serious regulatory violations and alleged negligence at ProFlight Aero Services, the flight school where McPherson had been instructing, raising critical questions about oversight in aviation training. But that's not the worst part. That's coming up. The ill-fated flight took off around 2:40 p.m. under clear weather conditions. Witnesses reported seeing the aircraft climb before experiencing a loss of engine power at low altitude. And according to the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, the plane began a shallow left turn before descending rapidly, and then surveillance footage from a nearby facility captured the airplane's final moments, showing it struggling to maintain altitude before crashing just beyond the runway in a residential area. Upon impact, the aircraft caught fire, sending thick smoke into the air. The Piper is flown from the left seat, traditionally with the instructor in the right seat. Now, on a Piper, Cherokee Piper, there's only one door, and it's on the right side where the instructor sits. McPherson was able to get out of the plane, but the student in the left seat wasn't. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but the fire had already engulfed much of the fuselage, making rescue efforts difficult, impossible. Kozel, the student pilot, was found deceased at the scene. McPherson survived the crash, but suffered injuries. The wreckage was extensively damaged by fire, complicating the investigation. And a subsequent examination of the aircraft revealed that it had suffered a partial engine power loss, though the exact cause remained undetermined due to the fire damage. Investigators considered several possibilities, including mechanical failure or fuel-related issues, but no definitive conclusion was reached. However, McPherson was not legally qualified to serve as pilot in command, raising concerns about his ability to respond effectively to in-flight emergencies. You see, McPherson had lost his pilot certification nearly a year earlier. And let's back up even further than that. According to court documents, McPherson failed his pilot certificate examination twice, finally passing on the third try. In November of 2020 and March of 2021, he allegedly veered off the runway and damaged planes during landings at Central Jersey Regional Airport. A safety hotline complaint was filed against him, and the FAA local office investigated, and it resulted in a recertification test. It's called a 709 flight by pilots because that's the last three numbers of the regulation. And during that reexamination flight on September 29th, 2021, the examiner had to take control of the plane to prevent it from crashing. And this was a test failure. so McPherson failed the 709 ride. The following month, on October 7th, 2021, he formally surrendered his certificate to the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, acknowledging his inability to meet competency standards. A temporary airman certificate so he could train and recertify with a restriction to not carry passengers, issued after his surrender, expired on November 8th, 2021, rendering him unqualified to serve as a pilot in command or transport passengers. Despite this, McPherson allegedly continued to instruct students, placing them, including Kozel, at grave risk. According to court records, McPherson logged 79 hours of flight instruction during this time out of the Braden Air Park in Forks Township, and he did 3 lessons to Kozel out of Queen City Airport in Allentown. And here's the worst part about the flight school's involvement. The investigation revealed that McPherson's actions were allegedly enabled by Newman Salim, the owner of ProFlight Aero Services. Between October 2021 and September 2022, the two conspired to conceal McPherson's uncertified status, allowing him to train students who likely assumed their instruction was legitimate. Over this period, the school collected approximately $101,000 in fees for flight hours that could not be credited toward student certifications. As the FAA investigated these violations, McPherson and Salim submitted false affidavits asserting that McPherson had permission to instruct, an attempt to obstruct the regulatory process that was ultimately exposed. So on September 28, 2022, this negligence had fatal consequences. And while the exact cause of the crash is unknown, McPherson's lack of qualifications compounded the tragedy. Last summer, after the NTSB released their final report on the crash, the United States Attorney's Office for Eastern Pennsylvania filed an indictment for manslaughter and serving as an airman without a certificate. McPherson pleaded not guilty to all charges. He was released after posting a $50,000 bond, according to the court docket, and was prohibited from contacting any of the witnesses, including flight school owner Salim. The trial was originally scheduled for September of 2024, and then it got moved to May of 2025. And then on February 13th, 2025, a federal grand jury in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania issued a superseding indictment against McPherson, charging him with the involuntary manslaughter, but also conspiracy to commit offenses against the United States, wire fraud, obstruction of an administrative proceeding, and the 40 counts of serving as an airman without a certificate. Again, McPherson has pleaded not guilty to all counts. And the new indictment added the flight school owner. Newman Salim faces charges of conspiracy to commit offenses against the United States, wire fraud, and obstruction of an administrative proceeding. And according to the docket, the federal judge in this case has now pushed back the trial to October of 2025. And as of March 23rd, 2025, both defendants await that trial, and they are presumed innocent until they're proven guilty. Here's where it really gets difficult for the defendants. According to local press, the Lehigh Valley Live, Salim knew that McPherson had failed that 709 flight, but let McPherson fly anyway. According to Lehigh Valley Live, McPherson texted Salim the day he surrendered his certificate to let him know that he had failed and he had been advised by his attorney not to fly. Quote, "Perhaps we just tell students I'm out for a couple of weeks until I get a negative COVID test or something." McPherson allegedly texted Salim, who then allegedly responded, "Understood, that's fine, it's nobody's business, so nobody needs to know anything." The two, again, are innocent until proven guilty, and it'll be interesting to see what evidence the United States Attorney's Office presents at trial. Salim's attorney has stated that Mr. Salim is cooperating with authorities. We are awaiting discovery. As far as McPherson's attorney, Angelo Cameron, in full disclosure, he sent a cease and desist to several media outlets that were covering the story back in the fall, including this channel last September, claiming we had reported several misrepresentations and inaccuracies, but in his letter he didn't provide any citations or specifics. And at least one other media outlet received the very same letter with the same unspecified claims on inaccuracy. I requested Mr. Cameron to provide the details, but I got no response. He also claimed we had used confidential information in our report, which we used the NTSB final report, the actual indictment, the press release from the United States Attorney's Office, and local media reports. So I'm not sure which of those internet source documents constituted confidential, but I got no reply to that either from Mr. Cameron. Again, I want to stress, in this country, you are innocent until proven guilty, and it's imperative that we let the court system determine that and not social media. What public facts and evidence we do have is that McPherson had failed a 709 check ride, that he had surrendered his certificate, that he was on that plane in the right seat with a student when that plane crashed and the student died. He faces the potential for serious prison time if found guilty on those counts. And the same for Newman Salim, innocent until proven guilty. We'll be watching this one to see how it transpires. Now, my takeaway: as a student, it's okay to ask to see your instructor's certificates. It's okay to look up your instructor in the FAA Airmen's Registry database. It's on the internet. It's really important for flight schools to do their due diligence and make sure that their instructors' I's have been dotted and their T's crossed. If you ever find yourself training at a school that allows uncertificated pilots to instruct, run. And while I'm not big on tattling, this situation would warrant it. Lives are on the line. Call the FAA. Let them investigate. All right, thanks for watching, and thanks to our sponsors like 67 Design, 67D.com, credible mounts for your vehicles, and our other sponsors are in the links below. And if you want to check out our original report on Philip McPherson, watch it right here. And remember, superior judgment trumps superior skills. Take care.